Shaun, thank you so much for making the time today and coming to our podcast studio here in Prague. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's my first visit to Prague.
Is it?
Very first, and I've already been impressed.
You have just arrived straight from the airport. How long will you be staying in Prague for?
Unfortunately, I'll only be staying for the one night, but I've just in my short trip from the airport coming, I kind of already feel like I can live here.
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's see if the idea will be the same after you spend some time here. But I'm really happy that we got the opportunity to meet in person and to chat about many different topics. You are one of the most skilled and experienced people in terms of luxury safari and luxury travel to Africa and in Africa. You are from South Africa, if I'm right.
Absolutely correct.
Tell me I always like to ask my guests about their beginnings, how they fell in the tourism industry, how they started in the tourism industry, and what made them, feel so attached to the industry. How was it for you?
So I had a very interesting start into the industry. I come from a Dutch family that immigrated to South Africa many years ago, and we originally, our holidays as a family would be 1 year you'll do a beach holiday, 1 year you'll go to the famous Kruger National Park. And as a child, I absolutely despised going to the Kruger National Park. My parents were safari fanatics, and they would, in the mornings when the gate opens at 6, you leave at 6. And at night, when the gate closes at 6, you're right back. You're the last vehicle that comes home. And for me as a hyperactive child, I found being locked up in a car was torture. I ended up finishing my school education and got the opportunity to go to university, where originally I thought that being a lawyer is the occupation for me. To my parents' disappointment, I finished my law degree and then turned around and said, this is not what I want to do. The university I was at offered a course that was a commercial degree in hotel and tourism management, which I then started doing. And I originally started working in city hotels. I was very fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time. And at a very young age of 26, already a GM of a city hotel. And at that point, I got the opportunity to transfer within that business I was working. And they sent me up to Botswana to go and manage a refurbishment project for them.
Mm-hmm.
Working up in Botswana in the wonderful Chobe region, for the first time, I actually started appreciating safaris, learning about nature, learning about the difference you can make. And I was completely hooked. And that was 26 years ago, because 26 years ago when I returned, andBeyond offered me a wonderful position. And 25 years later, I'm still working for them and happy with what I do.
Still going strong. Yeah, we'll get to andBeyond a bit later, but I'm still curious about the early days, let's say. So you had to basically take a little detour after your first experiences with Kruger, with Safari, and you mentioned that you didn't really like it much. So what made you? What gave you the idea that the hotel industry and working in hospitality could actually be the path for you?
As a child, I always said I wanted to work for the company that makes the crisps, so chips.
Okay.
And it was because you can eat as much as you want, was the first kind of intro that I had into the catering kind of side of the business. After school, I did have a temporary job working in a brewery canteen,
Mm-hmm.
which then started introducing me to kind of the catering world. And while I was doing my law degree, I did have the waitering side of life, as any student does, to kind of earn extra money. And that's where I started falling in love with the catering side of the business,
Mm-hmm.
or helping people achieve with what they would like. And that's how I ended up deciding going into the hotel industry, because the personality type of making people's dreams come true, helping them achieve what they want, and just being there to serve, basically, is what drove me into the hospitality compared to the law side of business, where you have to be quite an aggressive fighter to make a success.
That's right. In your university and in this starting, the start of your career, was this in Joburg or was it in Cape Town?
It was in the capital of South Africa, in a city called Pretoria,
Oh,
which is not far away from Johannesburg.
I see. And how was it? Because I have never personally been to South Africa, so I may have some misunderstandings about the country and the culture. And I'm sure that it's way different now than what it was when you were, I don't want to say, let's say younger, in your 20s. But how tough was it? Because you mentioned that you became a GM at the age of 26, which is definitely not really common, especially not here in Europe. How hard was it for you to work your way up so quickly?
So the years when I was growing up at school, that was during the years in South Africa when apartheid was still being enforced. So it was a very different country. Um, it was an interesting time where, as a young child, you don't really understand what it is all about. And as you start growing older, you start asking questions. But at a very young age, that changed. So Nelson Mandela was freed as I went into university. I had the pleasure of actually hearing him speak before he became president at the university itself. And you start looking at things differently as a student, and you've got influence from outside. And fortunately, the country changed. I keep on saying that Nelson Mandela was an angel that was sent to South Africa, because the only reason our country didn't go into a civil war because of a man like Nelson Mandela that had the foresight of understanding how to bring different cultures, different people together and unite it as one country. And he did that. So I was fortunate growing up in that period and then having the change at university. But I was, I, I worked very hard. It was long hours, but I still say it wasn't just that, it was part of luck as well. The hotel that I worked in had a lot of team members that left. And I would work hard for 3 months, and then suddenly my senior left, and they would go, "Oh, Shaun is a good option." And then I got the promotion. So I managed to work myself up by luck and by hard work to get to the general manager position at the age.
Yeah, of 26, which was
Yes.
great success. Right. If we then continue your steps, you've mentioned Botswana, and then essentially starting to work for andBeyond. Maybe to our listeners and viewers on YouTube, we should introduce andBeyond a little bit, because not everybody is familiar with the brand. I will start from my from my point of view, and then you will take it further. andBeyond is one of the leading brands in terms of experiential travel, I would say, on selected parts of the world, definitely in Africa. We are speaking about that beautiful continent today, but andBeyond also operates in South America, in Asia, and Antarctica. I think I did my homework
Correct.
correct?
Yes, you did
Yeah,
your
I
homework
mean, I
correct.
mean, some of our clients had been to andBeyond lodges and did andBeyond itineraries, and they had just such a great time. So it's quite natural for me to speak so highly about andBeyond, and obviously there is a reason why we are in such a great relationship together. But what I personally really appreciate the most about andBeyond is the sustainability and, let's say, the cultural also activities that you do, and that you want to empower local communities and so on. I'm really eager to listen more about things like this from you. So just to wrap it up, andBeyond operates their own lodges, about 30 of them, I think.
Correct.
And then incredible travel products, travel experiences. Right.
You are so right. So
And that's about it. Now you go on.
I'll tell you about the last 25 years within andBeyond. So originally, while I was doing my studies at the University of Pretoria, part of one of the lessons we had, they spoke about a company called CCA, the abbreviation CCA, and it stood for Conservation Corporation. And that was what andBeyond was originally called when it was founded 32 years ago. And I could never understand CCA. CCA, what was that?
It sounds like
And
CCTV or
yes, correct. And only when I started getting into the industry itself and working in Botswana, I understood, oh, this was a very specific company. One of the things that was part of the lesson at university was about community engagement, about sustainability, when in those days we didn't even know what it meant to be sustainable. So I was exposed at a very early age or very early period in my industry, when I started working in the industry,
yeah.
to understand this is actually the company they were referring to. I when I interviewed, I got a job as a GM, general manager of one of their properties that was based just outside of the Kruger. And part of your job description was actually engaging with communities, making a difference. And it was an interesting kind of mind shift, working from a city hotel where people didn't have the understanding of what it is to be a good neighbor, to a property where it was now absolutely expected for you to be a good neighbor. And I'll tell you a story which stuck with me through my entire industry days of working. I went to the local community because it was part of my job to go and meet the principal at the local school.
Mm.
And I arrived at the local school. The kids were out on break. I parked the lodge vehicle underneath a tree for the shade because it was quite a hot summer's day, and went to the principal's office, which, if I have to compare it in size, it is maybe a portable loo, double the size of that. So when you entered the headmaster's office, you couldn't put the chair down. You literally had to move the chair to open the door. And I ended up sitting with the headmaster. And part of the engagement that andBeyond does with its local community, it's not us trying to tell them what they need, but rather having conversations and understanding what the need is and how we can make a difference. And sat down with the principal, and he was explaining to me that one of the needs specifically in that school was additional classrooms. And it was a fascinating moment because just after he said that, there was a knock on the door. And I got up from my chair, moved my chair to now open the door. And there was a little girl of about 7 or 8 years old. And she asked me if I would mind moving my car. And I was quite confused, going, there's lots of space. Why would I need to move my car? And when I asked her, she responded with quite a sharp tongue that hit deeply, although it was not intended deeply, because her answer was, because you parked inside of our classroom,
Okay.
which immediately made the lights go on, understanding that this class was being educated underneath a tree instead of being in a proper classroom where they can pay attention to the teacher that was giving them guidance. And at that moment, the lights go on and you suddenly realize that this is a area and a community and a school that is in desperate need of help. I'm very happy to say, a year later, with the engagement of the lodge team and engagement with our guests that stayed with us, we were able to make quite a big difference to the school by adding 3 classrooms, a library, and fitting it out with equipment and electricity, which is quite a big thing. That is also the year that our lodge won the best community lodge, or the lodge that made the biggest impact in their local community for that year. We won that as a team
That's
for making a difference.
Well, that's really a fascinating story. Always when you listen to specific stories and examples like this, it makes you realize how needed is our help, really. And when was this? What year was this?
This was in 2002.
Okay.
In andBeyond's philosophy, when we engage with communities, we don't believe in handouts. We rather try and do it as a hand up. So we will engage with local communities. We won't just throw money at a problem. It is the community also needs to come back and give it it needs to be a project where we can do the initial investment, then move away, and the community or whoever is the authorities looking after that entity needs to be able to sustain it. And they need to have some form of commitment within that project that you're doing. A great example, and that was specifically at this lodge as well, is water was a problem. There wasn't opulent water available for our construction of those classrooms. So the way and the community in the area was exceptionally poor, with a 70% unemployment rate in that specific community village. So the way we got the community to have a buy-in and a commitment to the building of the classrooms was the kids were asked every afternoon when they go and collect water for their family at the local river to just bring 1 liter of water additional that they can bring to the school. We supplied this big water tank, and every day all the kids brought 1 liter of water.
Mm-hmm.
And by having those kids bringing the water, it gave them the ownership of, we helped build this classroom. We helped to establish this building. And by doing that, you actually get ownership from the community where they feel that it's not a handout that they've been given, but they actually partly own that themselves. And then looking after it, making sure that it remains beautiful and in good standing is then a lot easier to do.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I guess with the social sustainability, we call it with very nicely now. I think back in 2002, like you mentioned, nobody knew what sustainability really was. You just wanted to help, right? But
We'd make a difference.
Make a difference
Is what we
That's
try
right.
and do.
But I think it's always better to educate rather than just, like you mentioned, hand out and give and like tick the box. Like, yes, I gave them some money and that's it. But it's better to educate, show them the way, I guess.
And that's right. Though there's a great example with people are always willing to give and make a difference. So there's often organizations that say, bring pencils, bring sweets, and hand it out to the local community. But there's a very specific way of actually doing that in a responsible way. So when you drive through the village and you see the kids, don't just hand them out sweets, because they're in an area where sweets continually eating the sweets damage teeth, and they don't have access to healthcare and dentists. If you see a child and they say, I need a pen, I need a pencil, it's so easy to take a pen and a pencil and give it to the kids. But what people don't realize is the kids then learn the habit of, instead of going to school, rather be next to the road when a tourist comes, ask for a pencil. So our recommendation is, yes, the need of pens, pencils, paper, books are always very, very great in some of those rural areas. But rather take your bunch of pencils to the school, give it to the teacher to be able to use as a reward for kids that are in school, that are learning, instead of the ones that are not and out on the street either begging, because that's an easier option for them to do.
I see.
Another good suggestion for people traveling to some of these rural areas, if they want to make a difference and they do want to bring something, the recommendation of bringing a soccer ball is kind of one of the great tools or the great toys that you can give to a class of kids and the entire class can play with it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just bringing a single toy, a single car, a single doll, where you make one kid or two kids happy, with a soccer ball or a football, you can actually make a whole class of kids happy.
I see. How would you say that the situation has changed over the past 22 years? We mentioned the year of 2002. Now 2025 is January. I need to reset my inner calendar. But so say 2025, 23 years after, is the situation dramatically different to what it was before?
In areas where you see hotels and tourist organizations establish relationships with their local communities, you can see quite a big improvement in the entire economics of a little town, or how it actually starts developing. We've got a property that's located in South Africa, and it's the property where the story of andBeyond originally started. It was the first property where our shareholders, purchased dilapidated farmlands, and it was old pineapple farms and cattle farms. And they started removing all the human infrastructures and allowed nature to just take back the area to itself. Originally, the little town close to this national park, and the national park is called Phinda Private Game Reserve, was small. They didn't see anybody from the outside because nobody would really drive through. It wasn't on a tourist route, and people and unemployment was a huge problem in that area. With the lodges establishing, creating job opportunities for local community members, those team members need to spend their salaries by feeding their families. So the economy starts getting momentum with the people getting a salary, going back into the community, buying food, buying locally produced items, and the person that then earns that money starts spending it in the community. So it originally started as a small community with very little commercial enterprises to a mini city now where there's from a bakery, a builder, absolutely the entire area has exploded with a main road that goes right through that community that is now kind of on the tourist route.
Mhm.
So the last kind of 30 years have made a big difference in that community specifically.
Mhm.
And everywhere where you start seeing tourism enterprises engaging, you see the improvement in upliftment, education, employment, and hope for kids, where they can actually now look out and say, well, at least I've got um, the need to go and find a job, to be able to earn and be able to buy a car, a house, get married, whatever it is their dreams actually hold.
Yeah, I think actually that's one of the biggest duties and obligations of luxury travel, especially in areas like rural Africa or be it some other continents. But in the undeveloped areas, you cannot just go there, spend 3-4 thousand dollars per night and act like nothing is happening around you. So I'm glad that you see the difference in areas where the tourism is. I mean, no, it's not like all the brands and all the properties are behaving like they should, right? But we should lead and we should pioneer kind of the way and show others how it's done. So that's lovely. And we mentioned that you guys have almost 30 lodges and operate in different countries. So let's take a little tour around Africa, if we can. We mentioned you are from South Africa. That's your home country. I'm sure that you know this country best. You also have experience with Botswana. Can you easily answer me the question of your favorite country in Africa or area where you would go for a holiday anytime?
So that's a very difficult
I know, I
question to
know.
answer. And I've been fortunate with andBeyond. I've worked for them in South Africa, Botswana, as well as up in East Africa, where I had the opportunity to live in the Serengeti for a period of 3 years. So my best way to answer that question is, out of our portfolio of the 29 lodges that we have, 27 of them are located in Africa, all the way from Cape Town and up to Kenya and Tanzania. To say I have a favorite would be very unfair because each of those destinations have something special. And I know it sounds like a sales pitch that somebody is saying, well, I need to have, it's like picking a favorite child. You don't really have a favorite child. I would rather say, I'm not going to pick a favorite child, but I am going to say there are certain activities that I would pick a certain child to go with. If I have to pick 3 very special destinations, I would say Namibia is an amazing destination, and that is because of a personal trip that I did with a very good friend of mine.
Mhm.
We ended up doing a road trip through Namibia, and it's a country I explain as the most beautiful nothing, because you can sit on your viewing deck and look out into the distance, and it's the mountains in the distance tend to change color consistently from minute to minute, going from blue to purple to black.
Does Namibia really feel like a different planet?
It does feel like a very different planet. And you'll peer out to those mountains, and your colleague or your traveling companion would say, "What are you looking at?" And you'll go, "Nothing," because that is nothing. It's the most beautiful nothing. So for a friend trip that you are very comfortable with, Namibia is amazing. If you're looking for romance, I would probably consider a country like Zanzibar. We're very fortunate to have a small island off the coast of Zanzibar, an island called Nemba Island, and it's a destination that is absolutely idyllic. The island is so small that if you take a walk around the island, it takes you about 30 minutes to walk all around. You share the island with only 24 other guests, or 23 if you count yourself. So maximum of 24 guests. The sand on on the island itself feels like baby talcum powder, and you never tend to wear shoes when you're on the island. Now, who wants a better place in the middle of the Indian Ocean for romance and having a partner? You can't ask for anything better. And then the last one I would recommend is if you're looking at traveling with your family and your kids are younger, my recommendation is my home country, South Africa, because it's got a variety of activities that you can do and to keep kids occupied while you travel along. So I mentioned as a young child, I did not always enjoy safaris as much as my parents. And when I was younger, it felt very monotonous. You would drive in a car, or you'll be stuck in a hot car without air conditioning, and you'll be driving around looking at animals. And for younger kids, when you go on safari, it can sometimes be too long to just have the same activity for 10 or 12 days. In South Africa, you can break up your trip by doing safari for 5 or 6 days, and then you take the family down to Cape Town, where you then get the opportunity to go and see penguins, or take a cable car up Table Mountain. And the cable car in itself is exciting for kids because it's something that they're usually not familiar with. But you get the opportunity to get on top of a mountain, have these amazing views, and then still be interacting with different kinds of animals that occur throughout.
Right. Well, like I said before, I've never been to the country, so I cannot really uh, tell from experience. But based on our clients' experience and what our travel designers are recommending, South Africa would be the ideal destination for families. Right. There are some advices that we give to clients. For example, if somebody goes on their 10th or 8th safari and he's, let's say, a more experienced safari traveler, a country like Botswana could be great with the fly-in safaris and so on. What country would you say that offers the most adventure, let's say, out of these?
So I think the best way to explain that is Africa is a destination that you can keep on returning to the same destination and yet never have the same experience. If I can use Paris, for example, if you've traveled to Paris and you've been to the Eiffel Tower and you come back on a return trip and you go and visit the Eiffel Tower again, you've seen it, you've photographed it, you've climbed onto it, you've done everything that you possibly could do. Where in Africa, when you do a safari, every single day is different. On this safari, you see elephant. On the next one, you see leopard. If you start getting into experienced, you can one day see everything. On the next day, you can see nothing. Yet, during a safari, the team will always keep you engaged by talking through nature. You'll be able to get the opportunity to learn medicinal uses of certain plants that occur in a region. So not one experience is ever the same. And adventure means different things for different people. If you want to go and meet the gorillas up in Rwanda, it is an absolute amazing experience, and then recommended that you combine it by going to see the Great Migration in the Serengeti and the Masai Mara in Kenya. But every country has got different levels of adventure and different interests that will tweak for clients to travel to Africa. The thing about Africa is people travel to go and see animals on their first trip, and they always return because of the people. They fall in love with the destination. They actually feel like there's a heart string that kind of attaches you to the continent. And often you get the comment of clients that visit, as they walk off the plane, they feel like they've actually returned home. And it keeps on bringing them back. When I have consultations with clients and trying to understand what they are looking for on their African holiday, you often get the comment that they say, well, this trip is my bucket list trip, and this is the only time I'll come to Africa. And I usually stop them and say, I've got very bad news for you, but you think it's going to be your one and only trip. This is only going to be one of many more to follow. And I have not been wrong up to date with that comment that I've made to clients. They always return because there's always more to see, more to experience, and you never seem to get enough.
So we cannot just simplify it by saying South Africa, families, Kenya, Tanzania, first time safari, Botswana, adventure experience. It's a very bad way to look at things, I guess.
Absolutely. Every single one of those countries have got great adventures. So if I can use Botswana as an example, people often look at Botswana and they don't see the greatness of Botswana. Botswana is the authorities or the government in Botswana have used an approach with their tourism that they would rather have smaller properties, charge more, and have less impact because of the less people on that specific area, which has been a great approach. So if you travel to Botswana and you stay in one of the small lodges, the chances of you seeing a lot of people around is going to be very limited. But the adventure aspect is you've got this wide open spaces, and you can go on a driving safari in a vehicle and go and see animals. If you want to slow it down a little bit and you want to take it a little bit more relaxing, there's an experience where they take you on a guided canoe ride. Now, the local name for a canoe in Botswana is called the Makoro, and they take you on the Okavango Delta, and you float in this dugout wooden canoe, and they start taking you through the plants. You end up seeing amazing frogs, little birds. You learn about water lilies and how you can actually use their stems as a straw to drink water, because it acts as a filtering system as well.
Mm-hmm.
And while you're on the canoe, there are opportunities where you will actually see some big animals passing by on land, elephants or even a hippo or two. And sometimes, if you're lucky, don't be surprised if a crocodile comes past you while you're in this wooden canoe.
Wow.
Obviously, always safe. We haven't lost the guest yet. Quick.
Safety was one of my questions, of course. And I think especially people that haven't been to Africa yet, they kind of connected with safety issues naturally. You have countries in Africa that are dangerous, and you have countries that are not dangerous, but people think they might be, I guess. In those countries that we are speaking about, the southern part of Africa and the eastern part of Africa, are all of these countries safe in terms of, not in terms of animals, but in terms of the society? And what about the poachers? Are these safety concerns for people traveling to Africa?
So I'll start answering the question that Africa is like any other city anywhere else in the world. If you look at New York, there's certain areas where locals will tell you don't go to that area. And I think Africa, in a sense, is very similar. When you arrive in the cities, there are certain areas that is not always recommended for tourists to go and see. And that's why the recommendation is to use an operator on the ground that knows the area, and safety is first and foremost of andBeyond's way of doing it. When you look at some of the game areas and you look at poachers and that kind of thing, it is, I can't say that you'll never encounter any poaching, but most of the reserves in Africa have got protection units or ways of protecting the animals. And we always say we protect the animals more than what we do anything else, because that is keeping nature and part of our livelihood. The ethos of andBeyond has always been based on care of the land, care of the wildlife, and care of the people. And if you take one of those elements out of our ethos and belief, you actually have an unsuccessful business model. And the way to explain it is, to have animals, you need land. To look after animals, you need people. And the people are divided up into your guests that travel, your staff that are in the area or looking after guests at the lodge, as well as local community members that surround your wildlife areas. So if I take any one of those out of the equation, our business model fails, because without guests, we will not have animals to be able to show them. And if we don't have animals, the land would then be encroached on. The best way to kind of explain poachers is that it's one of the reasons why friendly neighbors is such a big requirement. That if bad elements do come into the local communities, you want a good neighbor that's going to tell them or tell us, going, just be careful. There seems to be an infiltration of not those great elements. And there's a warning system that we then get by how we can share that information with our anti-poaching units that are there to protect the animals, that be extra aware. There's the electric fences that keep the humans out and the animals in. And there's different ways of doing that. But guest safety is probably the least of my worry when guests travel to Africa or any of the other areas.
Now, focusing on South Africa, maybe we can focus on Cape Town, because many of my friends had been to Cape Town and enjoyed the city center and the waterfront and everything. But then they said on the outskirts of the city, they actually didn't really feel so safe. Is this really different to what it was? Is it better now? Is it the same? How would you describe it?
So it's still part of the remnants of apartheid, where certain racial groups were positioned in certain specific areas. And in South Africa, we do have quite a big divide between those that have and those that don't have. And in a poor country, people often forget that South Africa is still regarded as, although we're one of the better ones in Africa, there are still quite a lot of poor people in Africa and South Africa. And when you don't have, you always want to try and get. If it's legal or not legal, there's different ways of how you then try and get. But I wouldn't say there are certain areas, like I said, that I won't travel to, even as a local. But when you travel to the country, a good operator will be able to tell you, this is a go-to area and this is not a go-to area. And tourists don't tend to visit areas that are not safe.
Got it. So it's a key to travel with well-informed guys and local people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's go back to the animals, because like you said, it's usually the reason number one why people go to safari to Africa, and then they return because of the people. But in terms of the animals, and I've always been curious, with your lodges, are you able to track the animals that are in the area around your lodge, or is it just like random? Oh, there is a giraffe, but we have never seen this giraffe. Or do you know this is a giraffe number 5? This is Alex.
So the first
How
thing,
does it work?
the animals definitely don't have the names of Alex or Jerry at the lodge. It is often tempting for the staff to start calling certain animals by a certain name, because yes, you do get to know them. So the way we actually work. So when you go out on safari, you will be accompanied by a safari guide as well as a tracker that has been trained to track the animal tracks as they're driving along. So they look for signs that a specific animal has either passed on a road, or when you see a lot of broken tree branches, you know that a herd of elephants have moved through.
Maybe can we describe a full day on a safari for people that haven't been?
We absolutely can.
What are the specifics of it? And when do
It-
you actually get up? How early do you have to get up?
So when people look at a program, they always think that safari is quite a relaxed day. And I would say it's probably not what you think it is. So safaris usually start very early in the morning. During the summer months, when the sun is up earlier, you can get a wake-up call at around about 5 o'clock in the morning. And it's a wonderful wake-up call because the team will bring you a fresh juice, coffee with something to snack on to be able to get you ready for your safari. A half an hour later, you'll meet in the guest area where you'll be joining all the other guests, and you'll then be divided up into your safari vehicle with a maximum of 6 people traveling on a jeep heading out on safari. For the next 3.5, 4 hours, you'll be driving around the game area looking for whatever nature is going to present you that day. It might be a lion family that killed a giraffe and you find them feeding next to the road, or the elephant family that is moving on their way down to the water. Now, people ask, why are safaris so early? Now, animals have learnt that during the hot summer days, in the midday, it's too hot to move around. So they tend to do their movements, getting to the water or finding a protected area early in the morning when it's still cool. And then once you've been on safari for your 4.5 hours, not just the animals are hungry, we as humans tend to get hungry as well. And you then head back to the lodge for your breakfast. One of the most important things that I've forgotten to share is in the middle of your safari, we tend to stop for a coffee break. And we make the best coffee in the middle of the African bush that is available. Now, we've got a secret recipe for coffee, and it's a drink we call a choca mocarula.
Okay.
And I'm going to break it down. We take filter coffee
Mhm.
that was freshly brewed out in the bush, and we mix it with hot chocolate. And to top it off, there's a very famous alcohol liqueur, and it's a cream liqueur that's called amarula. Now, amarula is made from a local fruit that grows out in the bush.
Mhm.
So it's an amazingly tasting, sweet kind of fruit. And they make this cream liqueur of that, and we then mix it with a coffee. So you've got a hot chocolate coffee mix with a cream sweet liqueur. And it's a drink we then call the choca mocarula.
That
And
sounds
it's
lovely.
presented to guests as they drink it in the morning, halfway through their safari. You then head back, like I said, to the lodge, and you have your breakfast. And it then gives you an opportunity to just either relax next to the pool or your plunge pool at your room, go for a massage, or for the more adventurous type of guest, you get the opportunity to go out on a safari walk, where your safari guide will take you on a walk. Now, the aim of a walk is not always to go and see big animals. It's to actually go and see a lot more of the smaller animals, see how the commando ants walk and how they protect each other and how they would collect food and bring it back,
Mhm.
or go and see some plants. So it's learning some of the smaller things that you will not necessarily see from a safari jeep, so that you get exposed to not just big animals, but also understanding ecosystems and behind the scenes of what happens out in
Mhm.
nature. Once you get back to the lodge, it's usually lunchtime, and it's going to sound like we feed people too much. And it is one of the complaints we welcome, is that we give people too much food while they're out on safari. So you get the opportunity to get lunch. After lunch, you head back to your room and you start getting ready for your afternoon safari, where at about 3:30 in the afternoon, you meet for on the deck again with a homemade iced tea or an iced coffee with, again, something light to eat. And then you head out on your evening safari at round about 4 o'clock. So for the next 2 to 2.5 hours, you still have daylight to be able to see animals. But we then stop and have this pop-up bar with some of the best gin and tonics in Africa that guests get to drink. And we normally give guests the opportunity to taste an African delicacy, which is a meat that has been cured and dried. And for us, it's heaven. It's a delicacy we call biltong, or when it's in sausage form, we call it droewors.
Mm.
And that's presented as one of the snacks at the evening drink stop. And you then head out back, and it's sun is set, it's dark, and our tracker will then take out his spotlight, and he will use the spotlight to track some of the nocturnal animals, so animals that are very active at night. And you'll be able to then still be on safari and see some of the nocturnal animals that you don't traditionally see during the day. And you then head back to the lodge at around about 7:30 at night. You prepare yourself for dinner, and then it's traditionally an outdoor dinner, barbecue style dinners, either out in the bush or in an area that we call a boma. Now, a boma is a traditional meeting place and eating place that we have in Africa. So you'll be outside having your dinner, and I can promise you, food never tastes as good as when you serve it in this amazing location. Guests then enjoy their dinner around the campfire, meeting other guests, talking. What did they see during the day? What did they not see? What are they still hoping to see? And then at about 10:30 at night, guests head back to bed, because tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock, you're going to have another knock on your door with fresh coffee
You go
to
again.
start your day again
Wow.
out on safari.
That sounds like an amazing day full of experiences, and you get to have as many days as you want, right? During the
Very true.
safaris. I naturally have a few questions, maybe very basic questions. First one, you've mentioned the walking safari. That sounds like something. That sounds like a lot of snakes. I am personally. I adore snakes, but I'm terrified. I cannot hold a snake. I love watching YouTube videos about snakes, but if I would see a snake out in the wild, I would probably get a heart attack very, very quickly. So, what is your experience with snakes? Like, how do you work with them? Because, like, I just imagine you just step your foot in the bush and there is a black mamba waiting for you. Like, how is it in how is it in real
In real life, it
in
is
real
slightly
life?
different though.
They are
So
scared, right?
they tend to be scared of humans, and if they hear you coming, they do tend to try and get away. There are certain snakes that, as their protective measures, they actually pretend to be either dead and they just lie there. But the interaction that humans have with snakes while on safari is very limited. You will, one of the important things to remember is that we are actually coming into their environment and not them coming into ours. And if you respect the animals, animals respect you. The day when your attitude changes and you start disrespecting animals, that's usually the days when you start getting into trouble, and because nature will then disrespect you in your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But our guests, every now and again, yes, snakes do come into the lodge, but our teams have been trained to actually safely remove them and then relocate them back into the bush where they naturally occur.
All right. Apart from snakes, are there do animals naturally come to the lodge? Like, can you see a giraffe or an elephant like from your suite?
It often happens. So
Does?
when lodges are constructed, they try and find amazing views with amazing spots. And it's usually on a riverbank or with a watering hole right in front of the lodge. But guests often see animals right from their room, or even sometimes from their bed. So while waking up and having your cup of coffee and you open your curtains, there can be any animal outside your room, from elephants to hippos
To Black Mamba.
to a black mamba. But remember,
Yeah.
at night, they don't move.
Okay.
Reptiles tend to want a bit of heat and a bit of sun to be able to start moving.
I
So
see.
don't worry about that at
Right.
night.
It just reminded me of one of our clients, and he would love to go to a safari, but he has the same problem as me. He's terrified of snakes, and he had this idea that he would be equipped with a belt full of different antivenoms, and like if there was a snake that would bite him, he would just like immediately inject the antivenom. I guess it doesn't work like easy as that, right?
No, it actually doesn't work like that
But I
at
suppose
all.
you have a doctor at every lodge.
So in certain areas, we do
Yeah.
have a local doctor at every single lodge. But for example, in South Africa, so we subscribed to a great insurance company
Mhm.
that gives us immediate access via technology, where if any guest is not feeling comfortable, feeling sick, or having any issues, they are able to do a virtual consultation with a doctor straight away and then follow advice.
Mhm.
If guests have been exposed to a dangerous situation, and for all purposes, if they were bitten by a snake or a scorpion of any kind, we also do have the facilities of getting somebody evacuated immediately into a hospital that specializes in the treatment of that.
Mhm.
I can tell you, I don't know of any cases where a guest has been bitten by a snake
I
at all.
needed to hear that. I needed to hear that. Okay, so I will plan my safari very soon now, I guess.
You should definitely come to Africa so that we can take your heart
Yeah.
and tie it to Africa, because your plans to travel will not just be one trip. You'll definitely come back for more.
I definitely think so. Shaun, let's talk a little bit more about your personal travel. We had just been now covering Africa and safaris and everything about this, but let's say, out of safaris, where do you enjoy traveling to? What is on your bucket list, let's say?
On my bucket list. So, having worked for andBeyond, and with the fact that we operate in Asia, so India, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and Nepal, I've been very fortunate to visit those regions, as well as South America, where we operate in Chile, Argentina, Peru, Bolivia. And so I've been fortunate to be exposed to those areas. On personal travel, I think one of my most favorite places that I've visited is Mexico.
Mm.
And you think you go for one thing and then you fall in love with another. The people of Mexico have been probably one of the most hospitable nations that I've ever met, where tequila is offered within minutes of meeting and friends are made within very short periods of time. So Mexico is one of my favorite spots to visit. But if I look at bucket lists of places I still want to travel to, um, Machu Picchu is still on my list. I haven't been able to get to that yet. But I also want to explore a bit more of Europe. Just because of my heritage and my family coming from the Netherlands originally, I haven't dug into that history and learning about where my grandparents grew up.
Mm.
So that's something that's still on my bucket list to explore and find out more.
All right. Well, I hope that you will find time and enough opportunities to visit Europe and the Netherlands and hopefully Prague again soon. I'm really glad that the first impression was positive for you and that maybe you will spend more time here. I would like to thank you again for the time that you took today to speak about Africa, about traveling, about andBeyond, and about all these exciting topics. And hopefully, one day when you decide to visit Prague again, we get to sit down again and talk again. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
be careful on that invitation. I might come and settle in Prague forever.
No,
But
it would be a shame. You are needed in Africa.
I say thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think the thing I would want to leave your clients with is that there's no one safari that fits everybody. My recommendation is when you start planning a trip to Africa or a safari, take the time, get an expert to give you some advice and ideas that you then work with, and then plan your own personal trip that is going to make it amazing. Like some of the advice you've given me on Prague. But love the city, and I can't wait to return.